blue team members, the very few. All right, so we'll start out with a little introduction of who I am. My name is Walleed Aljony. I'm a very random name on Twitter, if you feel like following me. So I am a recent graduate of Eastern Michigan University. I enjoy playing soccer and watching it. Very few people that do that here. Professional-wise, I'm actually a security consultant for Viewpoint. I work on monitoring SIEM and vulnerability management. Currently, I do vulnerability management for various clients, and I've done SIEM monitoring in the past. Moving on, what is SIEM? So SIEM is a combination of two things. Usually you hear SIEM, the name confused all over the place, of SIM, SEM. Actually, it's a combination of SIM and SEM. SEM, which is Security Event Management, which is usually refers to real-time security monitoring, and it requires usually correlation in real time with data that's being utilized from people's organizations. Security Information Management usually requires the same thing, but referring back to historical information, so that data has to be usually stored and correlated and aggregated somewhere. But the beauty when it comes to SIEM is combining both of those two and getting those same results in near real time, hopefully, and also going back and looking at historical information. And then you get security information and event management. So moving on. So some people always think that they're actually ready for a SIEM deployment, and we always start with, are you even ready for an actual SIEM deployment? Do you actually have processes in place? Do you have documentation in place within your environment? Do you have a incident response or a forensic analysis team? Or do you actually have a SOC built out in your environment that is ready for a monitoring team? So there's the little meme. So there's a few approaches that to consider when you're actually going for a SIEM deployment. I usually like to break it out in 6 things. Goes into investment, a scope, the architecture, correlation, having proper use cases, and actually utilizing metrics for your deployment. We'll go first and go into the investment piece. When you invest, you actually have to invest in a process. So if you have an actual process, then great. If you don't, you actually have to establish a process for your monitoring techniques. Actually documenting on how you're going to detect intrusions or detect compromises within your environment. And actually, one more important thing is integration within other business units in your company. Another thing to consider is your actual personnel. So a proper SIEM deployment usually requires if you have a bigger scale environment, usually you have a subject matter expert, you have some analysts in the SOC, and you actually have management on top of both of those two. If you're a smaller scale environment, usually you have multiple people being the SMEs and the analysts, and then someone else managing it, or the same person doing all those three. So it really depends on the scale of the environment. Another thing is, which is very important, which is the management of the SIEM and the maintenance of it. So if you're a bigger organization, you might want to take your SIEM deployment in-house and manage everything there. Another thing you can utilize is managed security service provider. That's what the company that I work for does, Viewpoint. So also probably one of my favorite techniques is actually utilizing a co-managed technique, which is actually having inside personnel and actually having an MSSP combined to utilize your SIEM. So you can have some people doing some feeds and putting some logs in the SIEM, and actually having some people creating use cases for you, and having metrics and everything from both sides. And then that sets better expectations. I've seen it overall. Also, some things to consider is return on investment. This is not the return on investment for financial data, so you're not putting $1 and getting $2. This is what your company wants. So if you're going to be integrating within other business units, if you're actually going to reduce risk within your environment. Those are some things that you want return on. If you're actually going to prevent some fraud or data exfiltration or any of those sort of things. Moving on is taking on your scope, which is, I believe, the most important part of the SIEM deployment. Before even deploying a SIEM, first thing that you have to do is consider if you're prepared for it. If we, as I said earlier, set business goals that you want your SIEM to actually perform a year from now or 2 years from now. It doesn't happen right away, but it takes time to actually do it. If your goal is to utilize your SIEM for log management or storage, that's probably not the best option for utilization of SIEM. I've seen people where they wanted SIEM deployment to be their log server, and usually that's not the purpose of a SIEM deployment. Another thing would be integration within other business units, as I said earlier. One big thing to consider is if you actually want to build or buy a SIEM. Buying a SIEM usually consists of buying an appliance, then having to work with your inside personnel or vendors or MSSPs to utilize it, or you actually want to build one. Building, I've never personally seen a successful built SIEM deployment at a large scale, so if somebody's actually have something that's like that, I'd love to talk to you after the talk. So I'd like to find out more about it. Your budget is probably what's going to actually determine what kind of tool you use. I'll mention that a little bit later on the talk. So if you're going to be deploying a SIEM, you can have a budget of $10,000 or actually $1 million. I've seen deployments of SIEM go up to $1.5 million. So, or you can have a small scale environment that's going to have only $20,000 in budget that you want to utilize. So that really determines what kind of tool you use. So if you actually have a SOC and you have personnel to manage your SIEM, then something you want to invest in is probably like QRadar or Splunk. Or if you have a smaller environment and you want to utilize something like Alien Vault, which kind of gives you like an all-in-one sort of package. There's all other SIEMs out there. I know there's no ArcSight logo, so if anybody utilizes ArcSight, please don't hammer me over that. Integrating, the SIEM would probably be the business goal that you set for a long-term goal, something like integrating with your vulnerability management teams, integrating with your incident response team. Can you actually pull logs out of your SIEM? Can you utilize it for forensic efforts? Other things is actually integrating with open source intelligence. Not talking about something like ThreatBut where you have things just come up on the map. If you actually have some forums online, integrate with VirusTotal to see if you can actually catch malware and detect based upon hashes and stuff like that. Moving on would be the architecture of the SIEM. So you actually have to know what you're going to be actually monitoring within your SIEM. So if you have an asset list, it's great to define what you're going to be monitoring, so you can actually whitelist or blacklist assets, or you can determine not to monitor some assets within environments. I know I've seen clients have to monitor some AS400s, which was a pain to utilize. People still actually use that out there, so it's still out there, and people actually want to see what's going on with it. So you actually have to determine what you're going to be monitoring and everything like that. Moving on, if you are a bigger scale environment, you'd probably have multiple physical locations that you actually want to monitor. So you might want to have to deploy a sensor elsewhere if you have something in Michigan or you have something in Texas, and you actually have to collide those two together. If you have multiple businesses within one, if you're a hospital deployment and you have doctor offices that you have to monitor the doctors and see what they're doing. For example, there's inside Michigan healthcare providers that utilize doctors within the hospital. So those are all offices that need to be monitored. Acquisitions. Companies, usually bigger organizations, go through acquisitions yearly. I've seen it, and you usually inherit every vulnerability and malware and everything that comes along with that company. So those are things to consider. So if you're going and getting another company, some things is if you're actually going to plan ahead of time to see what you're going to deploy within your SIEM, to see a little sample of what that environment entails. What to actually forward within a SIEM deployment. Some stuff to consider would be some logs, some network flows, and some access changes within the environment. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. Correlation for SIEM is probably the most important part, and what the main purpose of it is. So some things to actually consider forwarding. I know everybody says log all the things and forward all the things when it comes to SIEM deployments, but there's some things you could do for intelligence feeds, such as subscription feeds, blacklists, open source intelligence sharing forums. For network activity, it's always good to forward your firewalls, your email logs, web DNS server, your malware analysis, which was really your AV hits, some IDS and IPS, and some NetFlow, and also some host monitoring with endpoint detection and some authentication type stuff like Active Directory and LDAP information. We'll go into a little bit what can get you your best bang for your buck, and so when you're starting a new deployment, what you can actually do so you can actually get a decent picture of your environment and what it has in there. One thing I want to point out, which is one of the things to monitor within your environment, which is file integrity monitoring, FIM. So you can always have critical files within an environment which you don't want to be modified, and also you can utilize it for your compliance and your data exfiltration. I've seen FIM, one big usage for it is for PCI compliance and seeing actual critical credit card related files being monitored on there. I've seen where a file being created and being from 1 kilobyte to going to 500 megs and being uploaded on a Dropbox port. That's something that you actually want to determine. That's probably not an intended use for a file to be uploaded like that. That goes with data exfiltration a little bit. Moving on, your correlation would be getting all your firewall logs. You can get your best bang for your buck if you're actually getting, like, let's say, for example, your authentication server, your firewall logs, your virus scanner, putting all those together, your maybe your wireless controller, and actually putting those and seeing what is happening within your environment. Then you'll kind of have a picture of your actual environment, what is being out there, what your users are doing, and all that sorts of stuff. There's a lot more stuff you can actually forward. Some use cases that are being utilized within SIEM, which could be authentication tracking, for example, with brute force authentications. If you have multiple login failures within users, that's something that you actually want to check for. SIEMs do usually have a plug-and-play option. I know when you plug in a SIEM, it usually has some rules created within there, which is this is stuff that is considered simple for SIEMs, but it is always good to be actually still monitoring it. Actually validating traffic for users or your network. If you see a bunch of your users utilizing Dropbox, or if they're on iTunes all day, they can actually have a clog up your network, and seeing actually users go from user 1 to being an admin, that's something that you want to actually watch for within your environment. Some use cases to actually consider for a SIEM deployment was actually detecting unidentified assets. I know this is not within logging, but if you actually have a very firm architecture within your environment, you can actually see if a rogue device went on your network or a rogue access point got plugged in, if you're actually monitoring for the right things. Some things to consider is when it comes to network spikes, if you're actually utilizing net flows, that's something that you're able to get. I know within QRadar, IBM's SIEM, you can actually have what they have is queue flows, and which really goes into all the way down to the application layer and actually sees what's going on within the network. So you'll see if somebody is utilizing things that they're not supposed to. Changes to critical files would be one of the most important things. I'd say if you're watching for registry files where usually malware likes to hide, that's something that you'd like to do, and also baseline analysis, which would be if you actually know what your network looks like, and then if you have a number that you know within events that is happening within the network, then if you see a network spike, you'll actually be able to tell what's going on if you're forwarding the correct things. Automating your SIEM would be something that would help your detection and prevention methods. Creating tickets within the environment when something pops up. If somebody logs in on a domain controller, that's not an authorized user, that's something to actually be alert on. Or automating alerts within reaction, having it go to the correct teams to react upon. It can be actually utilized for not only the SOC, but other IT infrastructure teams. Tuning your SIEMs. When you first plug in a SIEM, you'll actually realize that your environment is a very loud environment, and there's users doing all sorts of things. You always want to start out with tuning down the false positives. You'll get some lockout failures. It's just users typing in incorrect passwords. Baselining and actually being able to determine what's going on, and you'll be able to determine what's normal and abnormal traffic within the environment. And also that goes in within the data spikes also. Moving on to metrics. Usually if you don't have metrics, most likely your management would probably not approve of your SIEM deployment. So some metrics to consider would be utilizing the events that are happening within the environments, the events per second, the average event, and the maximum and the processed events within a SIEM. Not every event that's going to come in within a SIEM is going to have an alert within it. So you actually want to see what you're actually processing and your utilization within the SIEM. You can overload SIEMs if you have way too many events coming in within your environments. If you utilize an appliance and then you don't have the correct scope for it, then you can actually have your data storage filled up fairly quickly with events that you're not even knowing what they are. Alerts triggered within a SIEM that goes within the process events, and having alerts that come up for your teams to investigate. Some other reasons for metrics would be utilizing it for, I know PCI and COBIT has a bigger part of utilization for SIEMs. I know the access for the credit card related assets and file changes is a big couple of those, and also for COBIT there is if you're actually monitoring application logs and your application usage, and if there's attempted logons and failed logons within your application service, that's something that you want to see for those compliance reasons. There's plenty of compliance that you actually you can utilize SIEM for. Some metrics to consider would be your monitoring coverage. One of the things that people see if you're plugging in two assets within a SIEM deployment, then your environment is very quiet. You're not getting a full picture. If you just have a firewall logging to a SIEM, you're not going to get a full picture of what's happening within the actual network. Some people knock these down, but I think top 10 metrics are very important to have. So if you're actually having some top 10 metrics, such as the most attacker places, the most attacked host, some of the IPs that you can actually utilize to blacklist that are hitting your environment, and then also your utilization efforts within your SIEM. So if you actually have analysts that are monitoring threats, how long is it taking those analysts to detect and protect against the things that they're finding? Integrating with your business units, having metrics for them, such as the vulnerability management teams. You can have vulnerability management and correlate within other detection rules to have a a better response time. Your incident response process, you can have, in your forensics analysis, you can actually have logs that are going in your SIEM that you can utilize for those business units. So I want to talk about some, everybody talks about with logging all the things. For the best bang for your buck, I'd say if you have a new SIEM deployment, I'd always recommend for you to scope out what you actually want from your environment and actually what you want to do with it. So, and if you can start, you can really start light within your environment. Just log in your domain controller, your firewall, and then move on from there. The more you types of logs or types of net flows you can forward, the better picture that you're going to get within the environment. And then you can plug that in with other external sources that that can help SIEM feeds. There's, I know, IBM, Alien Vault, Splunk has some great feeds that you can utilize. VirusTotal, that's something you can upload your hashes to see if they actually have a hit on VirusTotal. Some things, that's some of the things that you should actually be able to monitor. Also, investing within a SIEM that actually determines what type of SIEM you're going to get. There's some SIEM tools that have drawbacks, whether you can actually do some vulnerability analysis to some of them you can't. Some SIEMs you can actually utilize for more than just a SIEM. I know, for example, for Splunk, you can actually utilize it for malware analysis. I've seen there's some applications that you can utilize for Splunk that has more uses than just a SIEM. For another example, with Alien Vault, you can do vulnerability assessments. You can actually scan your environment for vulnerabilities and correlate those vulnerabilities within alerts that are happening within your environment. So that's some of the examples that I have. And really, that's really all I have. If you guys have some questions, I'd love to answer some. Mm-hmm. With incident response, is that what you're mentioning? Mm-hmm. So within actually utilizing two different SIEM tools to utilize within each other, I've deployed two SIEM tools and they actually would go against each other and not actually talk well. So some things to consider is actually separating their. I wouldn't forward the same logs to two SIEMs. So if you actually have one portion has a very segregating the actual usage of both of those, so then you'll be able to not have them butt heads together. That's the best option I would have. If you're actually having to integrate within your incident response, I know what you mean. So if you're actually looking for a user that was being infected, something that you'd look at is your AV hits on that user. Then you probably could look at if he has some authentication failures, what firewall net traffic he's had. Within utilizing two tools, it's going to be a bit harder to grab those two together. Obviously, so if you could grab those one little thing from another and then kind of have to paint the picture, it would be sort of more of a manual effort, more than if you're going to utilize two SIEM tools. Yeah.
With your integration with your other teams, are you seeing any pushback from, oh, that's a false positive, or we don't care about that? Yep.
Yeah, so that happens a lot within vulnerability management. So if you detect something on an environment, and then you go and tell them this is on your environment. We saw this result on it. So they'll always hit back and say we're not actually vulnerable. So one thing is actually to have the results of how the vulnerability was caught. The best thing is usually with DLL files, if they'll have a DLL being left over from misconfiguration of an uninstalling a device, that's something that you're able to see from there.
What about with the SIEM perspective, though? Let's say we get an alert that says we've got multiple rapid SSH connections internally to another host.
Mm.
And they say, oh, that's our FTP server, that's our Unix box for this or that. And they say, we don't care about that because it's inside. How do you socialize that with your team and say, no, you need to look at this because that's not normal traffic?
Yeah, so one thing you'd be is best option, if you can go straight to the analyst, and if you have an FTP server or SSH server utilizing to each other, if you can go to them and if they're not going to respond to you, well, if you can do two things. You can tune out what's happening, which is probably not the best approach. If you can actually rule out that there is nothing bad happening, obviously the recommendation would be to tune out what's that would be considered as a false positive. If you're not getting a well response from that team, and if you've given them reasoning why this is bad, then probably the best thing is to escalate the process. I know it'll probably be bad on it'll look bad on you, but that's usually the best case scenario, that is to go to management and have it trickle down to those. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I can't hear.
So for getting a log from the sources, let's say a Windows server,
Uh-huh.
do you have a recommendation on
Really no preference to what goes on. It really see what the SIEM tool handles best. I've seen within QRadar deployments, it can take both of them. It really depends on the server also that you're running. So if the server that you're running handles doing both well, just do what really works best. There is really no preference. A lot of things that you do within a SIEM deployment goes upon usually sometimes trial and error also. So you can utilize that method. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. I've actually seen so are you talking about having it create a ticket for you and having somebody respond to it?
Yeah, so essentially what these will generally do is they'll create a workflow around, it'll put an alert into this other product that's integrated with the system.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you get an alert notification, and basically there's a workflow approval model where a person will review and decide whether or not the automated action, for example, may get to have a bad IP address to your firewall, and then the appropriate people will automatically make that action happen. It's kind of, as far as I'm aware, it's a newer sort of product category that's starting to crop up. I was wondering if you had any.
Yeah, I've never, to be honest with you, I've never had to utilize one of those, but I've seen where automation goes in within creating tickets and having actual teams respond to it, but within it having to create an automatic fire rule. I have not seen that personally. I'd love to talk about it with you after the talk. Any other questions? All right. So,